Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Abi, pronounced he, him, and I help run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Valarie Kaur's See No Stranger, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Searching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 94 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers and authors such as Valarie, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, we are thrilled to have with us Valarie Kaur for the paperback launch of her book, See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. Valarie Kaur is a renowned civil rights leader, lawyer, best-selling author, award-winning filmmaker, educator, innovator, and celebrated prophetic voice. She leads the Revolutionary Love Project to reclaim love as a force for justice. She leads the American consciousness in the wake, She leads the Revolutionary Love Project to reclaim love as a force for justice. Valarie burst into the American consciousness in the wake of the 2016 election when her Watch Night service address went viral with 40 million views worldwide. Her question, is this darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb, reframed the political moment and became a mantra for people fighting for change. In the last 20 years, Valarie has won policy change on multiple fronts, such as hate crimes, racial profiling, immigration detention, solitary confinement, internet freedom, and more. She founded Groundswell Movement, Faithful Internet, and the Yale Visual Law Project to inspire and equip advocates at the intersection of spirituality, storytelling, and justice. Valarie has been a regular TV commentator on MSNBC and contributor to CNN, NPR, PBS, The Hill, Huffington Post, and The Washington Post. A daughter of Sikh farmers in California's heartland, Valarie earned degrees at Stanford University, Harvard Divinity School, and Yale Law School. Joining Valarie in conversation tonight is Malkia Devich Cyril. Malkia Devich Cyril is a writer, public speaker, and award-winning activist on issues of digital rights, narrative power, Black liberation, and collective grief, as well as the founding and former executive director of Media Justice, a national hub boldly advancing racial justice, rights, and dignity in the digital age. After more than 20 years of media justice leadership, Devich Cyril now serves as a senior fellow at Media Justice and at Philip John Frick Initiative for Racial Equity. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Valarie and Malkia to the stage.
Hi, my love.
It is so good to see you and be here with you and be here with all of you in the audience today. How you doing today? Yeah. I think we all need to take a collective breath, you know. I know we're not the only ones that's been running around today, you know.
Yeah.
But we get to be here together. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing.
And that's everything, isn't it? To be here together.
That's right.
You know what? I'm going to invite us just to put our feet on the earth because I know I'm still shaken by the images we've been getting from the border. Haitian refugees, and I know the hellscape in Afghanistan and the pandemic and the wildfires here in California, the sequoias. I mean, there's a lot we are holding in our bodies, our collective body.
That's right.
Here, and so I found like, okay, the way we last is we breathe together. So I invite you to place your feet on the earth, and it's the same earth. Malkia, you're touching the same earth I am touching, all of us.
That's right.
Held together by this earth, and imagining like roots going into the earth, connecting each other. We're like trees in the forest. We look as though we are standing apart, but we are interconnected. We are interdependent. So from this place, imagining pulling the breath from those roots, giving each other breath. You can imagine letting the breath go up the body into the heart. Let it come and let it go.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. That's what we needed. That's what we needed. So here we are in this moment where we get to be together, where we get to have a conversation. And that's a beautiful thing, but we're also having this conversation in, like you just described, this extraordinary period of time, so many different things are happening, creating such severe, I don't know about you, but for me, severe alienation, deep anxiety. And I think that this is probably true for the collective, right? Not just the individual. And, in this place and in this time, we have this situation where COVID-19 has impacted our ability to be together. We're on Zoom right now, we're on Zoom right now, doing our best through this digital connection, um, your book, See No Stranger, it is about belonging. It is about connection. And I want to ask you to start us off just how the pandemic has impacted your sense of belonging now in this time, and whether you see any echoes of this story in your own history.
Mm. Oh, Malkia, I remember in March when the shutdown happened and we had to pick up our kids from school, my son. And it was almost as if the fear that was coursing in my body, like the terror in my veins, like it felt like a burning in the veins, right? All the uncertainty, all the unknowing. And it felt as if I was just bringing my people close in. Who do I belong to? Who belongs to me? Well, my babies, my husband, my parents, and I got to keep us safe. It was almost like my circle of care became really strong, but then really constricted because I was in survival mode. All of us were in survival mode. And it was really, and I could have stayed there. And I think a lot of people feel tempted just to stay there to protect me and my own. But something had happened right before the pandemic. The last thing I did was volunteer in an asylum clinic in Tijuana, sitting with migrant families, women who looked like me with their babies on their laps, escaping horrors in Central America. And because of Trump-era policies that are continuing today, the so-called Remain in Mexico program, it was a humanitarian crisis that was made real by these children who were sitting across from me. And when I met Vivian and her family, and I thought, okay, this is going to be my work for the season. I've done civil rights work for 2 decades, so this is who I'm going to accompany. But I could not even, then the pandemic happens, and I could not even bring myself to think of Vivian. My circle was small. It was, my sense of belonging was like this big. And it was a few weeks before I had the courage to wonder about her. And it was hard. This is where wonder is an act of will. I talk about how love is more than a feeling. Love is labor. And it begins with this radical act of wondering. Looking at the face of someone else and saying, you are a part of me I do not yet know. I see you as sister, as brother. And that was really hard to do. But that act of wonder led me to finally pick up my phone and send a WhatsApp message. And it was just like, how are you? And that opened up our relationship again. So suddenly my circle of care could expand and include her too. And she told me about her kids and her husband and how hard it was, because now they're not, it's not just the trauma and the violence and the policies, it's pandemic, and we're in relationship. And I didn't have all the answers. You don't have to have all the answers to expand your circle of care like that. You only have to be willing to be in relationship and to be transformed by that relationship. And fast forward, what ends up happening is that, I'm accompanying her, and I'm able to intervene enough to help bring her to the United States. She's in LA now. Her hearing is coming up. And amazing. So I think about what does it look like to practice revolutionary love? To practice seeing no stranger. It's in the granular acts of choosing to stretch our hearts when everything around us wants us to constrict them. And we have seen the pandemic, right? We have seen all the people who are most vulnerable, the Black and brown people, the indigenous people, the disabled people, the migrants. And so if each of us could do that expansive work of wondering and practicing love as a kind of labor and find our particular role, imagine the power we would unleash.
Oh, I love to imagine that. I'm feeling that in my spirit right now. I want to imagine that all day. You know what I mean? Because that sense of belonging is actually what is so profoundly missing on some levels, from this kind of when people identify in terms of a national identity, right? It's the identity that is connected to the United States, we leave out this part of ourselves, you know what I mean? That is about being a human being, that's about being whatever, all the parts of who we are, you know, and that just leaves us so disconnected from one another. So I'm just feeling you. I'm feeling what you're saying. And let me ask you this, you know, does this story that you've just described, this place where belonging is and revolutionary love are these acts, these granular acts. Do you see an echo in terms of those granular acts in your history and in your life?
I'm so glad you called me to that question, because how often has the nation cast people out of their circle of care? You know, how often has the nation constricted who is worthy of safety and dignity, and through policy and action and cultural forces cast the rest of us out? And I know that my family has lived and farmed in California for a century. And when my grandfather first arrived, immigration officials took one look at his beard and turban and put him in behind bars. He arrived as a pioneer, as a migrant from India, but it was a time of white nationalist fervor, right? Talk about constricting who counts as American. And so Ellis Island on the East Coast was this beacon of welcome for European immigrants, those who could begin to call themselves white. But Angel Island on the West Coast was a station that was designed to detain and deport as many Asian immigrants as possible. So my grandfather would have been deported. I wouldn't be here with you if it weren't for this intervention, that granular act of a white Christian man, a lawyer, who filed a writ of habeas corpus and helped free my grandfather on Christmas Eve. I'm still trying to find his descendants to thank him. Because that choice to like expand that circle, right? It just changed the destiny of my whole family.
That's amazing.
My grandfather, and there's another piece to this story, Malkia, because we can do this for each other when the nation refuses to. And it's always revolutionary when it happens. My grandfather is a farmer, you know, is a laborer, sleeps in grape crates in barns at night to keep himself safe from the snakes, earns pennies every hour, and he watches his Japanese American neighbors rounded up and taken to their own incarceration camps during World War II. Once again, the nation deciding who belongs and who does not. And my grandfather went to visit them when it was not safe to do so. He watched over their farms so that they would have a life to return to. And, you know, on the way back, I have this on my desk, on the way back from one of those visits, he brought back this piece of petrified wood that was on my family's fireplace my entire childhood. And now it's on my fireplace because I like it's weighty, you know, it's the gravity. And it's like, oh, this is what solidarity looks like. Like, this is what it means. This is what revolutionary love feels like. It's the audacity, you know, to bring others into care when the nation refuses to. And the granddaughter of those farmers becomes my best friend, Bryn Saito, in high school. And then in the wake of 9/11, when it's my family who's cast as our nation's new enemy, it was Bryn who catches me and feeds me soup and holds me as I'm weeping after hate crime after hate crime after hate crime. And fast forward, and Malkia, now it's Bryn and her family as Japanese American, as Asian Americans, who are our nation's new target for hate during COVID. And so now she's calling me and I'm holding her. And Bryn gave me, she's a poet now, and she gave me this word, ancestral solidarity. And how one act of revolutionary love inspires another. And so if we could take what our ancestors did for each other, and by the way, the only reason Bryn and I, our families, have any life here in the United States is because of your ancestors, because of Black women and men and leaders who fought for civil rights, who made America gave it any semblance of a democracy so that we could have a place in it too. And so what if we did that not just in the wake of crises? Like, what if we got a critical mass of people to do that, to build beloved community where we are as simply the default of how we belong to each other?
Woo, that's what I'm talking about. Let's make that happen. And so let me just ask you this. You know, you bring up the fact and the experience of 9/11. Let me just ask you this. So as here we are talking about building beloved community, right? Building beloved community, building this sense of belonging, these granular acts. Um, and yet, we live in a time and in a nation that is built on the unbelonging, on the casting out,
Yes.
From chattel slavery through to, racist immigration policy. And throughout all of that, woven is the sense of extraordinary loss, the sense of extraordinary grief, the sense that Judith Butler talks about, these ungrievable lives, these lives that don't matter, these lives that we are then disempowered from, even from mourning, right? We're not even allowed to mourn because they're not important according to, right, certain cultural narratives. And 9/11 is one of those moments where, so many people, both in the immediate moment of 9/11 and then in the aftermath of 9/11, the invasions, Afghanistan, Iran, and all of the, Pakistan, like all of the places that were harmed as a direct result of that moment. All of these lives that were deemed ungrievable, unimportant, right? So how do we deal with these hierarchies of grief? Now let me just ask you in this context. In the book, you wrote this. You wrote, grief is the price of love. Loving someone means that one day they will be grieving. They will leave you or you will leave them. The more you love, the more you grieve. Loving someone also means grieving with them. It means letting their pain and loss bleed into your own heart. When you see that pain coming, you may want to throw up the guardrail, sound the alarm, raise the flag, but you must also keep the borders of your heart porous in order to love well. Grieving is an act of surrender. And not just grieving is an act of surrender. So given that perspective, given that paragraph, what do you see? First of all, I just want to hear your reflections on grief after 9/11, just like the collective grief that we all experienced, that collective unbelonging. And then how do you see, if at all, correlations to this moment? Right now, here we are in COVID-19, also experiencing these hierarchies of grief and hierarchies of loss. People who are deemed like they don't matter, right? How do we think of, how in the revolutionary love framework might we think about this issue?
Malkia, this is why I was so honored when you said yes to having this conversation together.
It's such an honor.
And I'll answer your question, but I just remember, like, before I started the Revolutionary Love Project, I was involved in the movement for digital rights and digital freedom, and I would be on these organizing calls, and I would hear you speak, and it would just stir this energy inside of me. It's like, yes, digital rights are civil rights, and I just saw one day I need to thank Malkia for what they have given me, this energy that used to give me then, and then to watch you in recent years. I mean, you lost your beloved to cancer, and I have not met anyone who has been as brave with their grief as you have. Building beloved community around it. It has been extraordinary. So I carry your question really tenderly. And I think about, in the book, and See No Stranger, I map out these 10 core practices of revolutionary love, and grieving is one of them. And we think that, in our movement spaces, we don't protect a lot of space to grieve. We see it as secondary. We're so inside the trauma and the siege and the crisis response that we just got to go. And some of us do, but some of us are not willing to sit in that grief because it's uncomfortable and because it feels like, well, there's no fixing this. How do you fix it? There's no fixing grief. That's what you have shown me. There's only bearing it. There's no right words. There's only accompaniment. And the accompaniment itself is the act of deepening and building relationship and solidarity and energy that might turn into what we do together. This is why I think about what happened after 9/11 and the wake of that massive grief that we as a collective were feeling in our bodies, and how the president took to the screen that night, addressed the nation, and declared a war on terror. You cannot grieve and prepare to kill at the same time.
That's right. That's right. And can I just say something about that to you? Like, because I feel like this is an important point, this relationship between grief and grievance, you can't grieve if you transform the grief into reactionary grievance. But what about transforming it into revolutionary grievance? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like that reactionary grievance that makes it so that you hate and rage and fight and want to get retaliation and get revenge, right, for what you have lost, versus that revolutionary grievance that becomes the action that one can take, mobilized by grief. I mean, do you feel me?
Oh God, yeah. I when I'm hearing you, I'm like, right, unresolved grief,
yes,
releases enormous aggression. And that's what happened. We didn't have the space, because what does it mean to grieve? It means to sit with your own vulnerability, your own mortality, to wonder why, to say not like, oh, it's because they hate us, to take in the simple story, but to sit with the complexity of a world where people were so wounded that they would want to harm us in that way. And then to say, well, how do we wish to respond to that? Reactionary grievance that you're naming is what we did. We divided the world into us versus them. And we did it at the highest levels of government in our foreign policy. We did it in our state policies, and we did it on city streets. That's where the hate violence came from. This us versus them. And I keep thinking, like, fast forward, and we're in the age of COVID, where we haven't lost 3,000 people. We've lost hundreds of thousands of people. And during the Trump era, where there was even denial of the scale of loss and the inability to sink into what it means to bear that kind of loss, of course, it released enormous aggression. Of course, we chose another target to blame. And we saw it in the form of anti-Asian violence that we really saw in the wake of the massacre in Atlanta. And we saw it in our government policies and how quickly we've picked up war talk in relationship with China. And we've heard that war talk transcend presidencies, just like that war talk transcended from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden. Same thing with China. We're hearing it go from Trump to Biden. And so it is up to the rest of us to say, how much longer are we going to let our fear and our rage blind us? What would it mean to choose differently? What would it mean to see no stranger, to value human dignity above all, and let that shape how we approach our relationships on the world stage and right here?
But this is a country built on rage. So, so then the question, how do we do that? I mean, if you have a nation, not just, people talk about chattel slavery like it's in the past, right? Totally. But all of the laws of this country are built on that period, right? All of every law, the Constitution, everything about the way the country is designed structurally, it's set up, right, into an us versus them. It's set up, into a hierarchy of power. And so, and underneath it, that thin vein underneath it is all this rage, white rage. I want to say very explicitly, white rage, the rage of patriarchy, the rage of white nationalism, the rage, the rage of the wealthy, all of this about what they think will be taken from them. Right? So rage, and even and we're talking about how then that rage gets translated to working class people, gets translated across racial lines. But at the end of the day, how we have to think about and sit with, just like we're sitting with grief, how do we sit with rage, right? How do we sit with rage? So right now, we're in this time period. COVID-19 has kept us apart. We're in this politically polarized period. we've talked about the fact that there's this rising tide of white nationalism, but also this violent patriarchy, right? That just expressed itself in this Texas ruling around women's reproductive freedom, right? All this increased state repression that, the prison system is expanding. I mean, all of this violence. So, in this environment, how does revolutionary love meet this kind of rage?
Because white rage was my only reference for what rage looked like in the world, every time I felt anger rise in my body, I just choked it down. Right? Bell Hooks says this, like, Black people were trained to choke down their rage because it was dangerous to express it. And as a brown girl, as a South Asian American girl, I was conditioned to believe that I was only as good or as spiritual or loving as my ability to choke down my rage. That changed for me. My mother changed that for me. Like many women, I'm a survivor of sexual assault. And when I finally broke my silence in my extended family, I saw my mother stand between me and the rest of the room and said, they were trying to silence me. She was like, not my daughter. She will be free. And Malkia, there was rage roaring inside of her. I had never seen that kind of fury in my mother before, right? Arranged marriage at 20, has labored to give me the life that she was denied. And here she was with the tiger inside of her. And it was like she was showing me how to access my own rage to protect myself. She was showing me that my body was beloved and worthy, and that how little girls are conditioned in this country to choke down their rage. It's just severing us from our ability to access our own potential, our own ferocious energy. Because watch out, world, when we show up in our fullest for our beloveds, right? So I learned, and this is why rage is one of these practices of revolutionary love that I write about, that, oh, my love, your rage is not something to be ashamed of. Like, the goal is not to suppress it or to let it explode, right? The goal is to express it and process it in these safe containers, like our ancestors did, the wailing and screaming and drumming and dancing and crying. And once we move it through the body, right? Once we move that energy through the body, then we can be in relationship with it, and we can ask, what information does my rage carry? And what do I want to do with that energy? And I call that focused energy, that harnessed energy, divine rage. And that's very different from white rage, right? Because
very different. You look in the book, you said the aim of divine rage is not vengeance, but to reorder the world. Woo!
Yes.
You said it's precise and purposeful, like the focused fury projected into the world from the forehead of the goddess.
Yes.
I'm talking, so you said it points us to the humanity of even those who we are fighting. This is so powerful and so important, so central, I think, to this idea that, just like with grief, grief can go reactionary or revolutionary, and rage can go reactionary or revolutionary.
Yeah,
it can all go
so
one way or the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we get to decide. We get to decide how to process it through in this divine way. Oh, that piece, that sentence, or that paragraph hit right. You feel me? That one hit so hard. I mean,
oh, I'm so like, Malkia, why? When writing this book, my people have been here for a century, and we really had to organize and fight for the last 2 decades, right? But if we take colonization and slavery as the true starting point for the history of the Americas, of the United States, then what my people have had to survive for 2 decades is not an aberration. It's a continuation of what Black and Indigenous leaders have long fought. So when I was writing the book, I actually found myself to find wisdom sitting at the feet of Black women, of feminists, it was Audre Lorde who taught me, no, love, your anger is loaded with information and energy. You have to dance with it like a symphony. So it was like I was pulling from my own tradition and then from how mothers, caregivers have survived and fought and risen up on this soil. That is what helped me construct this compass around revolutionary love that some of our elders have called the new nonviolence, because it makes space for grief and makes space for rage and it makes space for loving on ourselves and playing different roles in the labor at any given time in order to find longevity.
I love that. And the interesting thing about that to me too is like, you've talked repeatedly now about solidarity, about this learning from Black history, about this walking together across these lines of race and ethnicity to achieve kind of this common goal of civil and human rights and shared collective belonging and collective power, that, shared decision making and all of that. But the challenge that I'm curious about is, so much of what we're up against is this this dichotomy of Black guilt and white innocence. Okay. Now I'm talking beyond the actual communities, but these ideas of guilt and innocence seeded across racial lines. And I just want to know, given your history, your background, your community, how do you think about that dichotomy? How do you see this struggle around guilt and innocence? One could think about it both in terms of how the justice system operates, but also just in terms of how communities are positioned in this country, right? How groups are positioned, and particularly in Asian American communities, positioned somewhere between Black guilt and white innocence. Yeah. And this struggle, I think is one of the ways that folks are kept divided. And so I just want to, how do you think about that dichotomy in relationship to revolutionary love?
This really came up with my conversations with my son. He's only 6, and I was struggling to explain racism to him. And every time I struggled to explain it, this idea that whiteness is superiority and innocence, and to be Black, to be dark is to be automatically criminalized, to be guilty, as you have named. It was confusing for him because I was like, what about Nana, my father? Like, he's Black, right? Because his skin is darker than ours. I'm like, no, he's So what has really helped me explain it to him, and then therefore explain it to myself, is to think not in terms of race, but in terms of caste. And Isabel Wilkerson has done this work, right? So beautiful, her book on caste.
It's an amazing book. If anyone that hasn't read it should read it. I loved it.
This is why it helped me so much, is because every society in the history of the world has been organized by a hierarchy of human value at some point. And it just so happens that hierarchy of human value on US soil is premised around the logic of white supremacy.
But can I ask you a question about that real quick, though? Yeah. Just on that, because that's true, but also I feel like every part of the world has Black people. I'm not talking about Africans. I'm talking about the people who are darker, who are cast out, and that it's true across, if you're in Vietnam, if you're in Pakistan, wherever you are in the world, the darker people are generally at the lower end of the caste. You know what I'm saying? So this might, even though white supremacy has a US context, I think it has a global context too. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
You're right. In India, we have, India has for centuries, for thousands of years, upheld this caste system, which is, like the United States, we're dismantling it in our laws and policies, India says, but then it's very much still has this cultural hold in who gets benefits, who has privilege. And that caste system is organized around vocation, but the folks on the very bottom are the darkest people. you are right. Like colorism, white as fair and dark or black as dirty or unclean, is a through line around, in so many of our societies. And I just wonder about the marbling of civilizations and the exchange of ideas and what takes hold, and how convenient then for the white landowners on this soil to create this construct called whiteness and find solidarity with white laborers and saying, no, you're better than them because they're dark. And so therefore blackness is bad and whiteness is good. And to create a racial caste system in this country. You know what's so fascinating, Malkia, is that the Sikh faith, was born 500 years ago in India by Guru Nanak, the founder of the faith, a spiritual teacher who said, "Na ko bedi nahi begana," I see no enemy, I see no stranger. Ikom God, we belong to each other, we are one. And that call of our equality and our essential dignity was radical in India because it was a direct, confrontation with the caste system. It was revolutionary. It was an act, it was a call to revolutionary love, and this is how we practice it. And so to have then, a little girl born on this soil have this revolutionary call in her ears and grow up in a country with a different kind of racial caste system, where many South Asians, many Asian Americans have found comfort and safety in trying to move up the ladder and cozy up to white innocence and say, no, we're white too. And I remember that as a kid. It's like, no, we're not like them. We're like you. I mean, even we're Sikh, not Hindu. We don't worship many gods or idols. I mean, things I would say as a kid to make myself palatable to my white Christian neighbors. And that's what the trick of white supremacy is, right? It divides us. Mm-hmm. And now to see more and more young people say, no, actually, the solution is not to cozy up because we'll never belong. And who are we to throw other people on the bus? Why not then find solidarity with Black people, to center Black lives and say, actually, we will find freedom for all if we dismantle the whole caste hierarchy to begin with. And all of our traditions have various calls to a revolutionary kind of love that we can lift up in our own languages, our own voices. And I think, Malkia, that is the call of our times. We will only last in the next 25 years. We're going to become a multiracial democracy. The number of people of color will exceed the number of white people. Will we descend into a kind of civil war in the next 25 years? Or will we birth a nation that has never been?
Well, I'm rooting for the latter. I'm rooting for that multiracial, powerful, beautiful, democratic, I want that. I don't want the Civil War. Let's leave that out. So let me ask you this last question, because I know we want to get to the audience Q&A. I just want to ask you, so this, this is a book of the times, like very much so, but it's also a book about you. It's a book about you. Your life became the landscape for a very big collective story, and it's beautifully written. It's wild how so much of your individual story is so relatable to everyone, to so many other people. You know what I mean? But let me ask you, if revolutionary love and your 10 elements are kind of an antidote, to the unbelonging, an antidote to the violence, that we're experiencing today, an antidote to this caste hierarchy that you just described, an antidote, what is the greatest intervention you hope this book and this concept will make in this time?
To see no stranger.
Hey, that's what I'm talking about.
I'm not asking everyone to become an activist like me, like us. I mean, please do if you're moved. But I believe we all have a role where we are, and I'm inviting people into a way of being, a way of seeing that leaves no one outside of our circle of care. And that sounds so simple, but it is a revolutionary act. Because what if we could walk down the street, and this is a practice that I invite people to do, my kids do, we look at faces and we say, okay, sister, brother, sibling, grandparent, beloved, child. We're training our eye. We all carry implicit bias. We're retraining our eye to see all others as a part of us we do not yet know. And when we see differently, Malkia, then we do differently. You know, it shapes who we stand up for. It shapes whose vigils we attend. It shapes what policies we support. It shapes what leaders we elect. It shapes how we do community right where we are. And I believe, you know, as a lawyer, we need sound government and we need just policy. And the only way we will deliver the world that we dream is through a shift in culture and consciousness, a way of being and seeing, awaken to our interdependence, a revolution of the heart. And this is where I believe that, you know, I'm so grateful for like anti-racism, you know, really being the thing that people are talking about right now. And I get a little worried because I see people like carrying it as an idea in their heads. They're trying to say the right words and be woke enough to, you know, as opposed to a way of orienting to the world that they carry in their bodies. Anti-racism is the bridge. Beloved community is the destination.
Oh, come on, say them words. That's right.
And if love is labor, love can be taught, love can be modeled, love can be practiced. You don't have to be a saint. These are tools. We can put these tools in your hands. So, Malkia, I've spent the last 20 years of my life organizing around hate. I will be spending the next 20 years organizing around love. And this is where it's so exciting that this book is, you know, anchoring a movement for revolutionary love. We have a whole learning hub where people can go and download educational curricula, teaching videos, guided inquiries.
What's the URL for that?
It's seenostranger.com.
There it is.
seenostranger.com. And you can be, if any of this was resonating with you, it's simply uncovering wisdom that is already inside of you. I mean, love is our birthright. We're just bringing this to the surface and saying, hey, you can do this right where you are. And
right where you are. And on that note, I want to start inviting the audience in a little bit, you know. And I see a question here from Adnan. And I think this is just a perfect question. How do you not lose hope? You know, how do you not lose hope? They say, I think change is possible and we are working toward change. And then you see the horrific treatment of Haitians at the border while horrific treatment against Central Americans continues. And it's like, is anything changing? So how do you not lose hope amidst everything that's going on?
Can I tell you the true answer?
Yes, please. We only want the truth up in here.
Hope has become a feeling that waxes and wanes in my life. Sometimes it's bright and luminous like a full moon, and I really feel like I am hopeful. And then other moments, it's like a crescent or I can't see it at all. I feel hopeless. And what I want to tell you, I used to think like, well, I can't do anything on days I can't feel hope. I'm just going to sink into despair. But once I accepted that hope will wax and wane, what matters is the work our hands do. You know, can I still show up in the darkness when I can't see any hope and still apply my hands to the labor?
Yes.
And that is where I've asked this question. You've heard me ask it. I said the future is dark. Is this darkness the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb? Malkia, it is both. It is both. We have lost so much, right? We have lost so much. And we are still losing so much. And so then the audacity to sit in our grief, in our rage, in our trauma, and lift our gaze to see through this darkness what is new that perhaps wasn't there before. To see the darkness of the womb. I mean, I have never seen so many people awake, rising up.
That's right.
You know, standing in solidarity. 20 years ago, I was alone. Here we are. Here you are. You knowing that our struggles are connected, that our liberation is bound up in each other, that all of our movements, I've never seen so many people rise up for Black lives, to stop Asian hate. There were no hashtags 20 years ago. I mean, to really connect racial justice with climate justice, with digital freedom. I mean, this kind of solidarity is modeling a beloved community. And every time that happens, I feel like, oh, I'm seeing glimpses of the nation that is wanting to be born. And
yes, I mean, and I love that. I love that because, you know, my family is a Panther family. My mom was a member of the Black Panther Party, and so I grew up in the echo of Fred Hampton, you know, and the coalition that he was trying to build. You know what I'm saying? And this is to me, that's what hits. You know, and the thing is that I'm a possibilist. I'm not an optimist. I'm not a pessimist. I'm a possibilist. I like to think about what's possible, you know?
So
and
good.
You feel me? I stay in reality, you know, I stay practical, but I like to deal with what something is always possible. Yeah. So I love, and somebody said here that, you know, your faith saturates in a way that doesn't read like a lesson, but reads more like a way of existing in the world. And I feel that right now, you know, even the way you just described your experience of hope waxing and waning. Now, another guest, another person asked the question, what does loving your enemy look like when it's Trump or Derek Chauvin? Wow. Because I don't love them, but I want to hear your answer.
No, and that's okay.
Go there.
And this is where, this is my answer. We all have different roles in the labor of revolutionary love at any given time. I define revolutionary love as a choice to labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves. But we all have a different role to play given the season of our lives and who we are. If you are someone who has a knee on your neck, it is not your role, my love, to look up at your opponent and try to wonder about them or love them. Your role is to stay alive, to take the next breath. That is your revolutionary act. You know, but if you are someone who is safe enough by virtue of your privilege or brave enough to tend to those kinds of opponents, we need you. We need you in the labor. And I'll tell a story that is not in the book that illustrates this, Malkia. The day of the insurrection, January 6th, my brother-in-law was trapped in the Capitol building. He's a reporter for CNN. As we were watching the white men, heavily tattooed Confederate flags burst through the doors, I was like, what will they do when they find him? He's not just a reporter, he's brown. And he got out and I noticed what I was feeling in my body. I was like, oh, this is terror. And the terror is familiar. How many times have I seen people I love in the face of white supremacist violence and been unable to help them? So I'm feeling all this, you know, all the grief, all the rage. And then I get a phone call from my teammate who helped me build the Revolutionary Love Project. She's really dear to me. And she says, Valarie, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I know. She's like, no, my parents were at the Capitol. I'm like, oh God, I'm so sorry. No. They were on the outside of the building. So my parents, my brother-in-law is on the inside and her parents are on the outside. And in that moment, it was like Dr. King's words that we are bound together in a single garment of human destiny. It was just, I felt it in my body, Malkia. And as much as I looked at those people and I wanted to hate them, and I did, I had to see them through the eyes of their daughter, who saw them as deeply wounded, deeply misinformed, whose racist impulses were galvanized by the president himself, that did not make them any less dangerous. But once I could see them through her eyes, they ceased having their power over me. They weren't one-dimensional monsters. They were people shaped by the cultural forces around them. And it might not be my role to tend to their wounds, but it might be hers.
And that makes sense to me. I mean, honestly, I also feel like people think that forgiveness, that kind of agape love that you're talking about, that somehow needs to translate into like. I don't need to like you.
No,
you know?
Dr. King said that, right?
Right. I don't need to like, we don't need to be friends. And we can be enemies actually, but everything I'm fighting for is going to make you live well too. You know what I mean? It's going to value your life too. But that doesn't mean that I like you or that I want you to keep doing what you're doing. Right?
Yeah.
But people think that you're supposed to, that somehow that love piece means that we have to be cool in a different way. And I'm like, that's not what it means.
No, that's
That's
it.
not what it means.
And Malkia, it's actually like not this like, this moral, not just a moral act. It is strategic. It is
Very
pragmatic.
much so.
I've been a lawyer, part of coalitions that have put police officers behind bars. I have unseated mayors from office. And after 20 years, I'm here to tell you that anytime we unseated bad actors as if they were a few bad apples, we unseat the president, right? Nothing really dramatic changes. Like, look at what we're seeing at the border.
That's right.
It's when we aim our swords and shields at the cultures, at the institutions that profit from oppression, that radicalize the people to keep doing what they're doing. That's when I see lasting change. And for that, you have to be able to see the humanity of even your opponents and get really smart about what is motivating them, why they're doing what they're doing, and how you can hold up a vision of a future that leaves no one behind, not even them.
Not even them. Not even them. And I love that has been consistently true in terms of our shared visions for change. I think that there's so many narratives about people of color hating white people, when in fact every movement for civil rights has been focused on, has helped so many different kinds of people. Affirmative action helped white women more than it helped anybody else, actually, at the end of the day.
You know what I'm saying?
Like, really, like, seriously, that these are movements of love. These are acts of great kindness, acts of great tenderness. And so I love it. Let me ask you this, just as we kind of wrap here. There's a question here about whether or not there are other South Asian activists and writers whose work on diversity, equality, and fighting hatred you might recommend. I think that's a great question. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, nothing is done alone, which is why you'll see, so this is the paperback of the book. It has 40 pages of endnotes with all kinds of resources and a reading list, lifting up other authors of color. And among those is my big sister, someone who I look to for wisdom and moral clarity, Deepa Iyer. She wrote a book called We Too Sing America. I know. I feel like America needs to know her name, and why hasn't that happened yet? So that's part of my work. Is like, please look to Deepa's work. And the latest thing that she has put out is this social change map that invites us to see our particular role in any healthy movement. Are you a caregiver? Are you a frontliner? Are you a visionary? And that has really helped me find longevity. Like, I don't have to be a frontliner anymore. I can be a mini elder. I can be a visionary and equip others in the labor. And so and this is where, can I say one more thing about the paperback, Malkia?
I really wish you would. I mean, we about to wrap up, but this is how we're going to end. Come on, bring it. Tell us about this paperback.
So the cover, this is all just a gift. It's still surreal to me. The cover is painted by Shepard Fairey, and he took, Sikh wisdom, this call to oneness, and just wove it into the artwork. And then Amplifier Art sprinkled some magic over the portrait. So what you're going to see is, you're going to find this in any bookstore. Here's the QR code on the back. And then once that happens, you just hover your phone in front of the book. Are you ready? Okay. Oh. And my phone is really, there it is. Okay, you ready? The suspense. Okay.
Revolutionary love is the call of our times. Revolutionary love is when we are brave enough to see no stranger, to look at anyone and think, you are a part of me I do not yet know. So when we flood the streets in our grief and our rage and fight for justice and insist on the humanity of our opponents, we are birthing the world to come, a world that leaves no one behind.
I can't. What? What? That is amazing. That is amazing. Now let me go get my copy and do that too. I didn't know about that.
My 2-year-old is like, Mommy talking. She thinks all the portraits can speak right now.
No, look, Harry Potter. Thank you, Harry Potter, for letting us know that this is what's happening. Look, everybody, I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation. So grateful to be here with you. Thank you for writing such an amazing and incredible book and for birthing this whole framework that we get to use to transform our world and ourselves. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I love you so much. Thank you, Strand Bookstore.
Valarie and Malkia, thank you both so much. Powerful, insightful words coming from both of you. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to purchase a copy of Valarie Kaur's See No Stranger, you could do so by clicking on the link below. Thank you both so much. Have a good evening. Take care.
Good night, everybody.